a degree of certainty, a sense of control over our lives. But if you step back and you think about it, life is never certain. We have less control over life than we think. And this is one of those paradoxes, when you begin to recognize how little control you have a lot more control.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Coachville Coaching Leadership Podcast. This is David, and today I am here with Norman Wolfe. He is the founder and CEO of Quantum Leaders, drawing on more than 40 years of experience leading organizations and researching how people and groups create outcomes. For Norman, he developed the Living Organization System to help organizations become more effective and achieve extraordinary success. I almost got tongue twisted there, my friend. The Living Organization System. I was going to say organism.
A lot of people do that.
But I think that's intentional in some ways, right? Because treating the organization not as a machine, but as a living and breathing system. That's kind of what you're talking about there, right?
Yeah, that's been my work for the last 2 decades. As I began, we were talking before the show started about how I went into consulting in 1988, and so I've worked with a lot of leaders and mostly helped them solve whatever challenges they were facing. I like to say my work over the years has been focused on helping organizations go from where they are now to where they want to be. It's a journey. We call that strategy and strategy planning and strategy execution. Back in the early 2000s, I don't know what happened. I kind of came across statistics at the time that strategy execution wasn't very effective. 70% of companies fail to achieve the goals they set. That got me really curious as to why, because if you look behind me, the books, and I'm sure you've got your bookshelves, of all the knowledge and wisdom on how to be effective at creating and executing strategy. And what I discovered, what I sensed, looking back at my own experience and looking at the 30% of executives or companies that are successful, we live in what I call a paradigm trap. We think of the organization, as you said, as a machine, and it's a black box. It takes inputs and converts it to outputs. The purpose of the black box is to convert inputs to outputs as efficiently as possible. In that model, leaders are the designers of the box, and the people are the component parts, along with other component parts such as plant, equipment, robots, AI, whatever tools and technologies we have to optimize the efficiency between converting inputs to outputs. That's the model we live in. It worked well for quite a number of years, over 100 years. There's nothing wrong with it for a certain time and place. Machines don't respond very quickly to changing environments. It ignores the dynamics of human interactions. When I first started work in 1969, I remember my supervisor saying one day, Norman, when you come to work, you leave your personal life at the door. But just because, all you are for us is a component part of the machine. Mm-hmm. You give us your time and your hours, and we give you dollars, and you go home, and then you live your life. And even today, so many years later, we still are trying to figure out this thing called work-life balance, right? There's work, and then there's life. If you think about it, I don't go around saying family life balance. There's family, and then there's my life. But work seems to be a separate piece in our lives. Mm-hmm. As I look back on my success, as someone, one day at a conference, somebody asked me, what you did, and I told them I'm a consultant. She asked me, so what's different about the way you do things? What makes you different than all the other consultants? And I said, I think it's because I see an organization differently. I see it as something alive, vibrant. It's got a soul. It's got purpose. It's got passion. The successful companies will demonstrate that. She said, you should write a book. The worst 5 words and the best 5 words anybody ever said to me. 6 years later, the book was published, The Living Organization. And as I said, what I set out to do is address the leader's number one responsibility, which is creating the results necessary to sustain long-term growth. But do it through a different lens. Do it through a lens where people aren't component parts, but we recognize that people are the organization. Think about it. You can take away all stakeholders. You can take away investors, customers, suppliers, any other stakeholder, and you can still have an organization. Take away the people. What do you got? You don't have an organization. So the people are the organization. The people are the living cells of the organization. So I said, okay, if I think of an organization as a living person, as a entity, not just another organism that operates by complex set of DNA instructions, but a living person. The question is, how does a person create the results they want? How do you create the outcomes you want? How do I create the outcomes I want? How does HP create the outcomes collectively that it wants?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the question I set out to answer when I started to write the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Norman, like when you think about like before we start recording, I wonder how this relates to what you're saying here. You've said like after like 40 years of like running after you left HP and you set out to run your own business, which, by the way, like America is Canada as well. It's small businesses and
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurs that
Yep.
power the economy. At the
Yes.
end of the day,
Always has.
it is the long tail of entrepreneurs that power this economy. You've learned that physically it's probably still demanding, but you've said that spiritually and internally you're much more at peace with how you've worked. And I'm curious like how that has factored into how you think about organizations as living, breathing.
Nobody's ever asked me that question quite like that before. So that's a stimulating question. Here's the way I've learned to understand life. It goes back to, how do we create results? How do we create the outcomes we want? Whether it's an individual or a collective, the the challenge is the same way. In the traditional paradigm, as I call it, or the mechanistic paradigm, we learn to create results by what we do. And we try to make what we do as efficient as possible. Human beings have a different way of creating results. Well, let me say it this way. We have different dynamic forces that play into how we create results. So what we do is one key element. I mean, we can always continue to try to optimize what we do. But what we do is highly affected by the quality of the interactions we have, our relationships. I said earlier that my supervisor said, when you come to work, you leave your personal life at the door.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that. Humans cannot do that. If I have a struggle with my wife or my kids when I leave the office in the morning, that carries with me. When I reach the door, it doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
And when I reach the office, it's still there. And so the quality of my doing this is going to be impacted by the quality of our relationships. In business, we talk about high performing teams that are synergistic. Well, what we're really saying is the quality of the relationships adds to my energy when I am doing something.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm in a conflicting situation, it takes away from my energy. And so my doing is less. So two component parts apply to a person. One is what we do, and the other is the relationships around what we do. There's a third element, and probably the most important one, and this gets to the heart of your question, the context. If you think about what causes us to behave the way we do as a person, it's driven by what I call a psychic DNA, and I'll tell you why I use the term psychic DNA. If you think about a machine and you ask the question, why does a machine do what it does? It has to do with how it's designed, the instruction set.
Mm-hmm.
You're a tech person, think of it as the operating system of the machine, right? Whether that's a chip or a set of gears and other devices, we design the machine. Living organisms also have a set of an operating system, and that's its DNA, right? It responds to life events based on what its DNA tells it. A bird flies, it doesn't swim in the water, and a tree isn't a plant, and cows aren't horses. So living organisms respond by the DNA. Humans, it's a unique living entity. We respond by what I call a psychic DNA, genetic or physical DNA that operates our bodies, but our choices of behaviors driven by previous experiences. We create a set of rules, if you will, from young childhood right up through, well, even now in my age, elderhood, as I like to call it, we're constantly framing, meaning making, that's why I call it context, aspect of life. And we learn to respond to life in a way that we believe through these experiences are going to make us safe and successful. And that works. That's what makes us efficient. That's what allows us to get up in the morning and navigate freeways and go to the grocery store and cook
Mm-hmm.
dinners. And we don't think about all of that. We just do it naturally, or what we think is natural. So when it comes to creating results that we want to create, we do things within the framework of relationships driven by our context.
Mm-hmm.
When we align our context, and to give it a more common name, belief systems, our worldview, our personal framework of life, when we align our context with our desired outcomes, things happen much more naturally. By naturally, easier. Some people call it by magic. I remember a time when I first began to get curious about it was I was at HP doing my annual business planning. And I remember looking back on what I said I wanted to do the previous year to see what I still have left to do. And there was a goal I set early on in the previous year to achieve something. And I completely forgot about it. I did no action to make it happen. I did nothing. I didn't track it. I didn't have KPIs for it. I just said it, and somehow I got busy doing other things. But you know what? I blew that goal out of the water. I mean, I just nailed it beyond. And maybe start to ask the question, wait a minute. I have no conscious focus on it, but something managed to make that goal become realized.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on here? What's causing things to happen by magic,
Mm-hmm.
not by effort? So I began to learn to align those three forces in my life:
Mm-hmm.
relationships, activity, and context, such that my life unfolds magically, with
Yeah.
ease, with less effort.
Yeah. There's something like, again, before we started recording, what we're talking about is my last 6 months being an independent, right? And one of the ways that I subscribed to and intentionally set out to do when running my own business was, I guess the word could be ease or flow, whatever it is, but it's focusing on relationships, like you're saying, right? I've built lots of relationships over so many years. So focusing on the relationships and like doing, you know, putting myself out there, right? To build new relationships as well, like doing this podcast, right? Meeting people in this way. But when that's just what I did, and I did the things I enjoy, I'm doing the things I enjoy right now. I'm not stuffing my calendar. I'm not over stressing about garbage, things that really don't matter. What I'm finding with that space that's created and the flow that's created, like this river that's just going down, it attracts, this is a river, it attracts the natural animals and all the plants that would thrive in this river, right? I know it's metaphorical, but once you start experiencing it, like when I'm not stressing about all the stupid things, right? Like, oh, what if? I'm not even thinking about that. All I'm thinking about is how do I harness the next relationship and the customers I do have right now? How do I treat them super well? That's my focus, and things are just happening. Word gets out. I don't even know how people are finding me, honestly, right? But I bet you it's word of mouth right now.
Well, I would argue, I love your river metaphor and the notion of attraction. I would argue that you are carrying a certain energy of beingness. The way you describe it, you have a certain context of life. You're not worried. You're not carrying a lot. Excuse me. You're not carrying a lot of worry energy. You carrying an energy of optimism. We talked before about how I started back 40 years ago consulting. Um, and when you life, this is the magic. Life does act like a magnet, like an attraction force. And who you are being is the way I'd like to say it, is what you will attract to you.
Hmm.
So if your beingness is positive, optimistic, focused on intention, like that little episode in my career at HP, the results will happen magically or feel magic because you can't say it. I did A and then B happened and then C happened. It's like, no, you're just allowing, like you said, the flow of life to happen.
Yeah.
All you're doing is maintaining a certain state of being. And that's what we call in our framework the power of context.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, and when you think about like corporate structures as well, like especially the bigger companies, they'll have customers for 20, 30 years plus years, right? And the interesting thing is that those are the customers, like, yeah, love and hate relationships between, like, I'm sure you had those at HP even back in the day. Love or hate, they're going to buy from you, right? Because it it takes a lot for them to get rid of all your stuff, all your products. The interesting thing is that every year you might have a certain sales rep on it, right? On that account, and they're forced to do all these actions,
Yes.
do all the motions, all the things you're supposed to do, and nothing happens at the end of the year. Basically, less than 12 months. And they would say, Norman, you suck. You're out. You're pipped. Goodbye. The next person comes in, shaking their hands, moving their body. I'm talking to a lot of people. And then a deal lands that year. Was it because of the second person or the first person? Right. Honestly, I would argue neither of them.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
I would argue neither of them. If someone was going to buy from HP, they would have bought from HP. Right. You might think you've moved the needle because you had a lot of conversations. Right. I don't, I think they would have bought anyways. Right. I know this is controversial. A lot of my corporate
Well,
friends will say, like, like, Dave, really? I'm like, yeah, I truly believe that. You could probably put someone on an account who is more customer focused, more nurturing, who could probably get the same results.
yeah. What you're describing, David, is the non-time based reality of results.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to the river metaphor, if you will. The river is flowing. If you're a large company, you've got momentum,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the river that is attracting the animals and the flowers and the fauna and all that, right? It's the momentum that has been built up. It's an energetic, you're really jumping into the core of the living organization frameworks principles. It's an energetic process. And what you really want to do is tune the energy that attracts what you want to create. And it's not about the doing this. It's not about the individual at any given time. Now, where the individual does matter is each individual sets uh, either adds to the energy or takes away from the energy. The results will happen at a later time. And the bigger the company, the longer the delay between action and results.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the
And
way,
that's the argument I'm making too. It's where you're focusing your energy. It's not a, like, you focus your energy today, the results, it's not going to be within 3 months.
no,
It's
no,
likely, you know, 2 years from now. That's where the energy is going to result in, right?
that's right.
Unfortunately, I don't think there's enough of long-term view of things, like where we do take, at least here in North America,
Yeah, but that's
there's
one
a
of
shorter
the
term.
that's one of the challenges with the machine paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
In a machine, when I first started in my career, I was a systems engineer, a systems programmer.
Mm-hmm.
So the feedback loop between when you took action and when you got the results was very tight, relatively speaking. Yeah, I'd write some code, I'd put it through the compiler, I'd run the test, it either worked or it didn't, right? Action to results were very, very close.
Mm-hmm.
As I got into management, action or a decision to results went initially when I was just a district service manager, might have been 6 months before I saw the results of my decisions. As I moved up through the organization, when I became the uh, admin manager, the regional admin manager for the Western Sales region. It took 3 years between the focus on the change and the decisions I made. It took 3 years to realize the results.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It has to do with what we're talking about, the dynamics of energy.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I had one of my friends who we kind of grew up with in HB together, and I was at the region level, and then he became the region systems engineering manager, and I was the region admin manager. And his first 6 months, he was going nuts. He
Mm-hmm.
was he was busy running around, and he came into my office one day and he said, "Norman, how are you so relaxed with so much to do?"
Mm.
And I said, "Mark, look, HP is a super tanker. It's a big ship.
Mm-hmm.
You're like a little tugboat that's running up and down its hull, trying to push here and push there, and you're running back and forth and up and down and up and down and up and down." I said, "Take it easy. What I do is I kind of push on the bow, and then I back up and I kind of watch what it's doing. I go, oh, it needs a little bit more of a push on the bow, so I push a little bit more. I'm not going to turn this by doing a lot of activity. It goes back to your salesman example, right? That you got to learn to understand the flow of life, the flow of events,
Yeah.
and just flow with it and adjust as accordingly. It's that's what brings the ease that you were talking about.
Yeah. I guess this philosophy, this system that you've developed, how does this apply now? There is certainly another period of uncertainty happening at this moment. I mean, this is March 2026 right now. Uncertainty from a
All over,
technology perspective, right?
all over.
Artificial intelligence.
Geopolitical,
Yeah,
yeah, it's all over the
yeah.
place.
Yeah, you got the problem with oil, geopolitics happening, right? There's a lot of uncertainty and it affects everyone, by the way. It affects markets, affects prices of things, affects inflation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you apply some of these principles now?
Well, I think the principles we talk about, so we're touching on just a few of them. One was context and setting the right context to sort of establish the momentum that you want to do. And we can get into that, how that happens in more detail. There's another element to, um, to life in general, and especially life of humans, is on one hand, we're trained to have a degree of certainty, a sense of control over our lives. But if you step back and you think about it, life is never certain. We have less control over life than we think. And when you, this is one of those paradoxes, when you begin to recognize how little control you have a lot more control. Here's why. When I met my wife, she was heavily involved with the world of improvisation theater. She was teaching it, she was performing in it, she was a director of a troupe, and I was exposed to the concept of improvisation. Now, I'm not talking about just comedy improv, ha ha, let's have
Hmm.
a good time. But the principles behind improvisation is really the principles of living with uncertainty. The reality is almost all of our life is uncertain. When you get up in the morning and you get in your car, you don't know what's going to happen. You go to the grocery store and you meet somebody, you're improvising. You don't have a script that's going to tell you what to do. But when it comes to creating results, we like to be in control. And we like to know how what's happening in the Middle East is going to affect me tomorrow in my life, and how do I make the decision? You can go nuts with all of that, trying to control all of the things you really have no control over.
Yeah, yeah,
But if you learn to focus on what your life is about and what you want to create, you're just starting out in your coaching. You've got a very clear intention of what you want to create. When an event happens that you get to make a decision on, you make that decision based on your intention, what we call your soulful purpose, if you want to give it a name. And you make decisions based on what do you think is best for that. And then you take that step. It's like improv. Life gives you something and you respond to that. And then you see what life does next. And then you respond to that and you adjust. So when you flow through life as an improviser would, going from what they call offer response, life becomes a lot easier, a lot
yeah,
less tension, a lot of less
yeah,
trying to figure everything out. It's just like,
yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
make a decision. I'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. It's there's a fundamental thing I've been really flowing into much more is certainly if you're trying to control everything, I mean everyone knows this, but we're humans. We try to control things even when it's beyond our control. We'll fall flat on our face and we'll figure it out, right? But fundamentally, what I feel that, like, one of the things I've been reading a lot more is the social scientist Arthur Brooks. He's written some good books, and one of the elements of happiness. So he says the elements of happiness are three things: it's satisfaction, enjoyment, and meaning. The meaning part, that pillar, is composed of having significance, feeling like you matter in the world, having purpose, and most importantly, having coherence. And coherence is like a fancy psychology word for how do you understand how things happen in life? What
That's
is
right.
your model, mental
That's
model
right. That's right.
for why things are the way they are, you know?
That's right.
And that comes in the form of faith, right? Religion, philosophy, and very often for most people, a combination of all, right? So, how do you understand the world and how things happen, why things happen? That's very important that you get that straight, right? And lock that down earlier in your life.
Well, and it's always evolving. So lock it down. I don't think my experience in my life is it never gets locked down. It's always adjusting. If you try to lock it down, then you're trying to make the world fit your model,
Hmm.
and the world will constantly challenge your model. Here's why. Think about life as if you were a 12-year-old. Now you've lived long enough. You're beginning to form your model about how life works and
Hmm.
your role in it. And you kind of make the rules of being a teenager, and you play the teenage game for a while, right? And you got to figure it out, and how to ask a woman for a date if you're a guy, or how to respond, and how to build friends, and how to interact. And you sort of have it figured out. And then yeah, if you lived your life like a teenager your whole life, if you locked it down, you really have a miserable life because it
You're
does.
that are just pretty wild right now.
Yeah, that's true.
By the way, I used the wrong word. Lock it down is probably the wrong words
Well,
I use. Yeah, yeah. But yes,
that's
I get the essence there.
I say that and I picked on that particular word because that's what people really want to do. That's where a lot of the struggle comes from. That's where the resistance to change comes from. Is we build a worldview, a coherent worldview, to use that term, a mental model, as you said. What we mean by context in our framework. You build your mental model of how the world works and then you want the world to always work that way. And when it doesn't, you're thrown off. Some people think that's a bad thing. I try to reframe it to say, when you're thrown off, your life, your soul, your desire to grow and expand you're being invited into an expansive point of view. So if you can say, hey, I'm being thrown off, my mental model isn't holding true anymore. I'm not getting the results I used to get, or I'm not getting the results I want now. A good place to start is at your context or your mental model, because you're trying to make the world fit your mental model instead of expanding your mental model to fit the world. They're very two different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, yeah, and and that's, I think that flows very well into like what, like, you study engineering and science. I study engineering and science, and good science is about creating a model or a theory, testing it against evidence to see if it supports the model, right? But then also challenging your own model and trying to break it and see where it breaks, and then trying to understand why it breaks and when it breaks, and what are the limitations on it, and do we need a new model of things, right? Like when Albert Einstein passed away, he had a model of the universe, but he didn't live long enough to see it through. And scientists after him, like Stephen Hawking, or that everyone knows, created, extended that model and said, you know what, Einstein was actually, it was up right up to this point, but then he's wrong after that,
That's right.
right? And people are disproving some of what Stephen Hawking is doing now, right? Like, well, he was right up to this point. Now here's the new model, right?
And Maxwell's work was right up until the point when Einstein said it's not good. It's partly right, but it's missing this piece. And we call that evolution, right? But it's also maturation on a human scale or from a human dimension. Our personal evolution is going from one mental model to the next expanded mental model to the
Mm-hmm.
next expanded mental. We call that
Mm-hmm.
maturation, right? And that's really the critical aspect of helping organizations perform better. Bringing this back to the notion that an organization's a living person, a collective of people who
Mm-hmm.
are come together for a common purpose, actually create a living entity. And that living entity has a contextual mental model. The organization collectively operates by its mental models, and all of the people within that collective sort of act like starlings. They follow that mental model. When I went from Pratt& Whitney to Hewlett-Packard, it didn't take me long to start behaving like a HP person, not
Mm-hmm.
like a Pratt& Whitney person, right?
Mm-hmm.
The collective energy field, the collective mental model, I learn it quickly and I adapt and I become
Yeah.
part of that.
Yeah.
And so this notion of mental models, as you point out, or I call the collective context, that's where the root of all of our challenges comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about resisting change, it's about learning to expand our mental models. And that's what we have to do with organization. That if we're not getting the results we want, not always, sometimes it's a simple tweak this process or add this system. But most of the time, big changes are because we're asking the organization to do something against its collective mental model. And you don't do anything to change or reframe that model. And that's where the resistance and the struggle comes in, individually in our lives and our collective lives of organization.
Yeah. And, last 40 years working, consulting with companies, developing this, the system that you've developed around the living organization system. What's one piece of advice you can give to all the listeners here about living your best life?
I would say we live in a world that has traditionally given overweighted the value of our intellect, objectivity. And I believe that where we get to achieve the things we've been talking about is to bring in the subjective world in balance with the objective world. Said another way, integrate the head and the heart. Not everything's about thoughts. There's this whole domain of feelings, intuition, insight, inspiration. Um, that actually provide greater guidance than the head will. So develop what we call heart-centered wisdom and balance the head and the heart. That will give you the full range of resources necessary to navigate times of uncertainty, times of change, and make life that magical flow of ease that you were referring to earlier.
Okay. Bring together the head and the heart. They're not separate things. And you can't just walk into a company one day and said, leave all your problems and emotions at home. You got to bring both, right? We come
You're
back
a
to that.
full human being.
Yep. All right, Norman. Well, look, if folks need to reach you and find out what you're up to, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Through my website, quantumleaders.com, or directly to me in WOLFE in Wolf at quantumleaders.com.
All right. Well, Norman, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today. And thanks everyone who stayed to the end here or fast forward to the end. I don't really care. As long as you reach the end, thank you very much. And I will see you all next time. And by the way, if you like this episode as well as the podcast, hit subscribe, like it, and share it with all your buddies. Take it easy. Ciao, ciao. That's a wrap on this episode of the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. I'm David Fung, and my mission is to help leaders grow, lead with impact, and build thriving teams. If you found this valuable, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow leader. Until next time, keep leading with purpose.